Story number 7, Potato Plant Inspectors. I believe the property size where I lived, when I was growing up in Otter Lake, Quebec, measured 1 square acre. This acre of land featured a 2-story house, our home, and the structures of our fathers, Mr. Cyril Gauthier's business, Gauthier's Garage. Dad's business was housed in 2 ample-sized buildings, the old shop and the new shop. Though our dwelling and the buildings of the business took up a lot of space, I would say 2/3 of our parents' property was dedicated to gardens. This was not always the case, but once Dad sold off all the old cars he had for scrap metal, it really opened up the space prime for planting. Both my mother and my grandmother were avid gardeners, and they would sow huge vegetable gardens each year. They sure did plant a lot of healthy vegetables, but they also dedicated some of the beds to grow beautiful flowers and to nurture fruit trees such as apple, plum, and cherry. As was the fashion in those days, large gardens were planted by the locals to grow, prepare, store, or preserve food to help families get through the long winters. Groceries were very expensive to buy at local stores or at bigger grocery stores in Shawville or Renfrew. So many Otter Lakers, including my grandmother and my mother, planted full vegetable gardens, ensuring a good supply of homegrown produce for both summer and winter months. We were fortunate to have a multitude of vegetables grown in our gardens. Granny and Mother planted everything from lettuce, yellow beans, lima beans, tomatoes, and peppers to assorted root vegetables like onions, beets, carrots, and of course potatoes. Personally, I am not a fan of eating potatoes, but as we all know, they are a staple of one's diet, and especially if one grew up in Otter Lake. They were a hardy vegetable, and if stored well, potatoes could last all winter long in a cool storage area. As such, much of the terrain was solely dedicated to potato patches. Potatoes got planted in the spring a short while after the last frost. Our father would purchase huge bags of seed potatoes, all of which would need to be sorted to find those potatoes with the healthy eyes. These got planted, eyes up in long trenches that were dug deep by my mother and grandmother. Once covered over with soil and watered, in no time at all, the plants would sprout above the soil, and lovely green stems would slowly develop. In reality, a potato plant is quite an interesting plant. The stems develop into hardy plants with an abundance of pretty green foliage. Well, they have pretty green foliage until a dreaded attack of potato beetles. Since our mother and granny had taken the time to dig and plant, it was now our time, the children, to tend to the rows of potato plants. All of us kids had a part in maintaining the gardens, but for a few years my brother Christopher and I were the official potato plant inspectors. Our goal was to do everything possible to ensure a good harvest of potatoes by autumn. This meant keeping the plants healthy and insect-free. I had no issue with the daily watering duties, and often due to some rainy days, the watering was not required, and I could relax watching television. I liked those days. I also had no issue with the hoeing duties. I could hill up a row of potatoes in no time at all. Often just for some fun, Chris and I would duel to see who could finish his row first. Sometimes I would slow down my pace and let Chris win. Nope, not true, he would always beat me, but then again he was older and had more muscle power. My biggest challenge in tending to the potato plants was dealing with the ever so yucky potato bugs. These creepy beetles freaked me out. I was so fortunate to have my brother Chris reassure me that these beetles were harmless to humans. He quipped that they could only hurt a human if they ate all the potato plant leaves, killed all the plants, stunted the harvest, and made me starve all winter. To demonstrate that they were harmless, he would take one in his hand and pet it. Chris then taught me how to hunch close to the ground and upturn each leaf to become more efficient in finding any sneaky ones hiding underneath. Chris advised that simply knocking them to the ground would not do, because they would just crawl back up on the plant and continue to snack on the leaves some more. Chris also cautioned that if we did not catch all the adult bugs, they would lay more eggs, and then we would really have a battle because the baby potato bugs were harder to find, and they had ravenous appetites. Hence, with Christopher's help, I was able to overcome my fears and snatch away as many of those potato leaf-eating insects as I could. Once we had completed the whole patch, Chris re-inspected the plants and told me that I did a great job. He was so happy with my work that he deputized me as an official potato plant inspector and potato bug catcher, and I called him Sergeant Spuds. Once we had gathered all the insects from the plants, the question was, what would we do with them now that we had them all trapped in a big pickle jar? There were several dozen. Well, Chris said if we followed Granny's instructions, we would need to put some lamp oil into the jar to kill them. Oh no, I thought, we cannot do that because that would be too cruel. Chris agreed and decided that we should just fill our jar with water from the water barrel and let them sit in the water all night long. Oh no, I said to Chris once more. We cannot do that because they will all drown, I cried. Chris laughed and explained, Oh, you silly brother, they cannot possibly drown because insects do not have any lungs. So how could they possibly drown? Oh, I said, now it made sense to me. So we dipped our big jar into the water barrel, ever so carefully ensuring not to let any of the potato leaf eating monsters get free. When the water reached 2/3 full in the jar, we tightly screwed on the lid and left the jar tucked away beside the water barrel. It was now time for an afternoon treat, so we walked up to Myrtle and Lennis Bretzlaff's convenience store, where Chris selected 2 frosty creamsicles for us. They were cold, sweet, and yummy. Picking potato bugs was well worth it that day. The next morning, we made our way out to the garden for the first watering of the day. After all the soil had absorbed the spray from our hoses and the plants looked refreshed, we went to check our big jar of potato bugs. I was hoping they would still be crawling about and moving their little legs, so that I could watch them throughout the day just for fun. Nope, they were all dead and as dead as potato beetles could be. I questioned Chris, but you said that bugs could not drown because they did not have any lungs? Chris laughed and said, I don't think they drowned in the water because they can all swim. He continued, I think they died of sunburn because you left them in that jar directly in yesterday afternoon's hot sun. Oh goodness, what a terrible fate for these bugs. What had I done? Chris then said, Do you know what we will do? I shrugged. He said, We will have to arrange a funeral for them and bury them. As such, we dumped the water from the jar. We dumped the dead bugs onto a newspaper to dry out, and once they were drier, we scooped them up and put them into a large Smarties box. Chris joked and he said maybe we should leave this box out for our brother Bernie to snack on. I laughed and said, No, Chris, we should never do that. Yuck. So instead, we dug a small hole in the ground behind the apple trees and laid our potato bugs to rest. We said a quick prayer, crossed ourselves to the Father, to the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And Chris said, Well, we better get going because it is time once again to go check for and pick more potato bugs. He joked, You know, Rick, this is our daily duty. Let's go. By the way, to this day, I still do not enjoy potatoes and never eat Smarties. Thank you. I do hope you enjoyed this silly little story. Thank you, Chris, for leaving me with this wonderful memory.